The top business stories live from Sky News' headquarters. Heathrow to resume some flights later after hundreds of cancellations today, with the impact expected for the last 4 days. The shutdown has seen European travel stocks fall. We'll assess what the economic cost might be. Very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live on this Friday with me, Darren McCaffrey. There is only one story in town today, and that is Heathrow, with the airport saying that some flights will resume later after at least 1,350 were cancelled today. Counter-terrorism police are leading an investigation into the cause of a fire at a substation in West London, which caused the complete shutdown of Europe's busiest airport. Let's speak to Chris Johnston. He is senior editor at Business Insider. Very good afternoon to you, Chris. And we've heard the word unprecedented used quite a lot today, but frankly, this is pretty unprecedented.
Yeah, I don't think Heathrow or any British airport has ever seen an incident like this. I guess the nearest comparison is the 2010 incident involving the volcano, which shut down airspace for quite a few days and was had a bigger impact because it affected every airport, not just Heathrow. But this has certainly been very bad news for all the passengers who have been affected today, as well as the airlines. British Airways, of course, is the biggest operator out of Heathrow with more than half the slots. It was due to operate some 670 flights today for about 107,000 passengers. So that airline alone has now got so many planes, so many crew in the wrong place. And it's going to take several days, I expect, for all of that to normalize. The CEO of BA, Sean Doyle, issued a statement this afternoon to that effect. Of course, there is good news that Heathrow is saying that they will be able to operate some flights this afternoon and are aiming to operate a normal schedule tomorrow. But I think it remains to be seen just how long it's going to take for the airport to get back to normal.
Yeah, and that's the interesting point, isn't it, Chris? As we look at pictures, live pictures of that substation, that power substation in West London that caught fire, is that it is going to take days. What type of conversations would have been had today at Heathrow? Running an airport's pretty complex at the best of times. In the midst of a crisis, you know, those conversations were probably pretty fraught, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, all airlines will have some form of contingency planning for situations like this. But as you suggested earlier, there's, this is a somewhat unprecedented situation. So bouncing back is going to be very difficult. I mean, a lot of flights from Heathrow go to JFK in New York, so traveling that route is going to be difficult, I think, for some time. There are other options from other airports in the southeast to get to a lot of the European destinations, but it won't just be British Airways facing these sort of problems about having aircraft and crew in the wrong places. That's going to be the case for any of the operators that use Heathrow, and particularly there's going to be just a massive backlog of people trying to complete their travel or get back, and we've also got people who are now stuck abroad, expecting to have come back to the UK today. That will be I guess facing an anxious wait now, just being unsure as to exactly when they will be able to travel.
Yeah, indeed. And as viewers can see at the bottom of the screen, we're expecting to hear from the CEO of Heathrow Airport in a statement which will be issued at 5 p.m. this afternoon. Chris, what does this do for the UK's reputation? Many people will be surprised that, one fire at one substation could close an airport the size of Heathrow. It doesn't it doesn't do well for Britain's reputation abroad, I might suggest, for its reputation to do business.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's something of an embarrassment, I think, for UK PLC. Obviously, we don't know exactly the circumstances as to what happened with this fire at the substation yet, but many people will be wondering, why backup systems failed, and indeed, just whether the infrastructure needs to be better. I can't remember an instance of, an airport in America, for example, being shut for so long for an incident like this. So yeah, it's going to involve some soul searching, I would have thought, and I don't think it'll damage Heathrow's reputation in the longer term because it's has such a monopoly on certain routes. But yeah, it's certainly not a great advertisement for Britain.
OK, Chris from Business Insider, thank you very much indeed. Let's stay with this topic and bring in Jonathan Maxwell. He's Chief Executive of the energy investor and developer Sustainable Development Capital. Very good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Just picking up on that, the infrastructure we've got here in the UK, it is a sign, isn't it? Maybe it's a big warning we should now all take notice of, that it's not very resilient.
It's a huge energy resilience and security shock. It reveals a big problem with the UK's energy sector, which is that it's built on a centralised system. So this is what happens if the grid fails or if the connection to the grid fails. The alternative to a centralised energy system where you completely rely on the grid is a decentralised energy system where you build energy closer to or right at the point of use. And not only is it more efficient, and typically substantially lower cost and lower carbon. But it also means that in a situation like this, when the grid fails, you've got the resilience and energy security to carry on operating. Think of all of the infrastructure assets throughout the country, the airports, but also the hospitals, universities, data centres across the country. What happens when the grid smokes out like you've got on your screen? Well, the answer, if you've got on-site generation, is you've got the resilience and security. And to Chris's point on the last interview, some American airports, Atlanta, Los Angeles, some European airports, Schiphol, Copenhagen and so on, they have either a large amount or some degree of on-site power generation that is resilient. And Heathrow clearly hasn't had that level of resilience built into its energy infrastructure, and it must have.
Isn't that the extraordinary thing, though, Jonathan, is that there doesn't seem to be a backup? I mean, that's quite something, isn't it?
I'm afraid this is the way that our energy system in the UK is. America has severe weather events. In 2012, the New York grid got knocked out by Superstorm Sandy. And it was such a shock because they had to decamp hospitals and it blew out incredible amounts of business that they did something about it. And they started to build on-site generation not only to give more resilient infrastructure, but precisely to back up the system if the grid ever failed. And we've never done that in the UK at scale. We've always built centralised power and centralized energy systems, but we've not focused enough on efficient and decentralized generation of energy, or what I call edge infrastructure. And that is the big message now. This is what we need. Look, this is why we need on-site generation to back the system up and to deliver lower cost, lower carbon, more reliable energy and energy security. That's what we're lacking. It's not just at this airport, it's all airports in the UK. And I'm afraid it's all public infrastructure, pretty much.
Do you think, this clearly it should be a wake-up call? I mean, do you think the government will listen? Or is it just the government, by the way? I mean, Heathrow itself has to take some form of responsibility.
Look, I think government and business, public sector uses about 15% of the UK's energy, but as you can see, buildings, industry, and transport is the bulk of the UK's energy use. So it's not just about government. Certainly, policy should focus on decentralised rather than just centralised energy. That is, build energy where it's needed. But business and industry needs to wake up and build in the resilience into their energy systems. I often say there is no such thing in the UK or anywhere in the world, as far as I've ever come across, in a business called a chief energy officer. And if this is a wake-up call, not just that the UK's centralised energy policy is on fire, literally. But now we need business and industry to wake up. And the great news is decentralized energy systems where you can build energy on site is lower cost, lower carbon, and it's faster to build than centralized energy infrastructure. That's what my firm, Sustainable Development Capital, has been doing for the last in fact, nearly 20 years now.
But obviously, this, that will involve money, and it's frankly something that, what businesses will argue they don't have at the moment, and certainly government would do the same. Well,
I'm a clean energy infrastructure investor. This is what I focus on: efficient and decentralized generation of energy infrastructure, edge infrastructure. My constituency, my firm, my investors are precisely the type of investors that put money into this infrastructure to solve that problem, so that we can put the right design, the right resilience, the right carbon footprint, and do it at a price and a cost which makes a great deal of sense. It's cheaper than business as usual. And let's use this opportunity to actually get more of this stuff done.
Okay, Jonathan, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. Well, let's have a look at the wider economic impact now of that Heathrow shutdown, what it's likely to be. Let's bring in Jatin Sharma. He's managing partner at Nardak Insurance. Very good afternoon to you. And I believe that you were meant to be, if I'm not wrong, in the UK today. You were meant to be on a flight landing in Heathrow, and you're stuck in LA. Is that right?
Yeah, I was sort of 2 films in on BA 282 and had just fallen asleep when the pilot announced we had just gone past Montreal, that we would not be able to land in London or any UK airport, and we were going to turn around and head back to LAX. I think the mood on the flight was of significant surprise. Fortunately, I had the internet, so I was able to find out what was going on, and I'm extremely lucky that I just got to sleep in my own bed last night and coordinate with my colleagues because we have quite a lot of expertise in transformer failure. So did a recce on the flight to try and understand what happened.
Montreal is not that close to LAX. I mean, you must have been on the plane for quite a long time all in.
I don't usually look this tired. I've had about 2.5 hours of sleep. So it's been a long day, but BA were great. And, I will say sometimes you look at these events and people focus on the negatives. I got to walk my kids to school this morning, which was a blessing. I've been able to speak to a number of clients that I wouldn't have been able to had I been in the air. And probably when I get rebooked, I'll get to spend Mother's Day with my mum, who's in the UK.
Well, you know what? Always look at the glass being half full. That's a good approach to life. And, obviously no one has been harmed, which, again, is a good thing. But let's talk about the economic impacts, because there will be some. We're talking here potentially of billions of pounds, aren't we?
Several billion pounds. And I think depending on how far you want to stretch the indirect versus direct impact of this, it will be fairly significant. We work in the insurance space, so a lot of that focuses on physical loss or damage. So that's the transformers that have been affected, the loss of revenue from those. But then you have the contingent element and the disruption, the economic value to Heathrow Airport, to the airlines that have been affected, to all the passengers. I was on a flight which is one of 1,300 a day, 200,000 passengers. So I'm just one of all of those. Obviously, those later in the day were told not to come to the airport. But there are wider liability implications. There's issues around penalties for failure to supply. And hopefully this will pass by quickly. I'm getting mixed messages about if my connecting flight is going ahead tomorrow, but the international flight isn't confirmed. So it's not clear when Heathrow is reopening.
No, there's been a lot of speculation about what may well have caused this fire. We know that the police are looking into that. But you're suggesting that it might have been caused by construction activity. Where have you got that from, effectively?
So you can search the utility that's involved in this case, the planned upgrade works that were scheduled to take place. And typically when we have losses that originate from transformers, there's a kind of bathtub curve in failure. They either happen typically at the earlier part of the installation, commissioning, and the first kind of 1 year, 2 years, what we would call the defects liability period, if things are settling in, or they happen at end of life. Now, this particular site had these planned scheduled works, so that's something that's easily discoverable online. And we know that that activity was scheduled in this sort of time frame.
And even we've been focusing clearly on Heathrow and its passengers, and to a degree the cargo today. But people also live near this substation, and they've been affected, and it will cost money to replace the substation too.
Absolutely, and the mental anguish of the people that live close to this, the likely impact on their property values, the desirability to be closer to these large electrical infrastructures, not necessarily something that I think locals will feel the same way about after this. There are alternatives to the way the infrastructure is arranged for Heathrow. I mean, generally speaking, it's a fairly resilient airport. I have nothing but good things to say about flying in and out of there, and I do it a lot every year. But when the redundancy levels fail on this, it does bring into question, what are the alternative ways to secure it? Before we even consider a third runway, what about, improving the infrastructure and the critical supplies that we have to support it? But it is a rare event, unfortunately, a high impact event.
OK, Jason, for the time being, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News.
Thank you.
And we're just going to bring you up to date with some news from Heathrow, about Heathrow, and that is from British Airways, who say we've been given clearance by Heathrow Airport to depart 8 of our long-haul flights from 7 p.m. today. We're now urgently contacting customers to let them know so they can make to the airport from 5 p.m. So that is essentially British Airways giving confirmation that the airport will begin to reopen at 5 p.m. and that 8 of the long-haul flights to places like Johannesburg, Singapore, Riyadh, Cape Town, Sydney and others will begin to take off from 7 p.m. This evening. But British Airways also saying the only customers who should make their way to Heathrow Airport are those booked on those flights. They're contacting customers as we speak. Might be a bit of a scramble to get to Heathrow and on your plane by 7 p.m, but they are hoping that 8 of the long-haul flights will take off from 7 p.m. this evening. Confirmation there from British Airways. OK, watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, continuing coverage of this developing story, looking at how European aviation stocks have fallen after that Heathrow shutdown. We'll be getting all the market reaction next.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news. Historic day here today.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
This is a huge moment.
It's incredible.
Now to California.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you is banned. How is this a fair election?
The cameras are poised, waiting to see what the president might do next.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I just took a shower above the couch. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. Fly Emirates, fly better.
And perhaps unsurprisingly, the closure of Heathrow has seen European airline stocks falling today. Let's speak to Joshua Mahoney, who's Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets. Very good afternoon to you, Josh. And as I say, unsurprisingly, we've seen the parent company of British Airways, EasyJet and others take a hit today.
Yeah, exactly. It's IAG which is really at the forefront of this, the likes of British Airways utilising Heathrow as their main hub. And therefore, they're always going to be taking a hit more so than likes of Ryanair and some of these low-cost airlines that like to utilise the likes of Stansted or Luton or Gatwick. And so IAG, down 2%. But certainly it could be worse because this news that they're likely going to be able to fly some flights later on today does allay some of those fears that we could start extending into the weekend. But damage has been done, but I think it could be worse.
Don't worry, I do the same all the time with the International Airline Group. But let's talk about the impact this will have on the overall airline business, because British Airways has done pretty well in the last couple of years post-COVID. They had pretty healthy profits, very healthy profits last year. But again, frankly, it's the last thing an airline as big as British Airways needs, given it's going to cost them a lot of money and it's really, really complex stuff.
Exactly. I mean, the logistical side of things is going to be particularly difficult as people try to relocate their planes and people back around the world. But certainly, I think if this had extended into multiple days, then it's just going to get more and more complex. Certainly from the company's perspective, you would like to think that people don't suddenly start to write off Heathrow and think that the airport is a risk in itself because of this single event. But certainly from the company's perspective, like you said, doing relatively well, and certainly as we've exited this pandemic period, it's felt like some of these companies have managed to really ramp up the cost of their products, and people are willing to pay. As inflation has gone up, so have airfares, and so these companies have done relatively well after a very difficult period where, of course, they were locked down for an extended period of time. But certainly this is a bit of a kick in the teeth. But ultimately, every business comes with risks. And this is a little bit of a left field hit that thankfully looks like it's not going to last as long as it could do.
OK, Josh, really appreciate your time this afternoon with the impact that is having on the markets. Thank you. OK, just to remind you of that news coming into us in the last couple of minutes, and that is we have got a statement from British Airways confirming that Heathrow Airport is due to open, actually, in the next couple of minutes at around 5 p.m. They're urgently contacting customers to let them know that 8 long-haul flights will take off from 7 p.m. today to various destinations: Johannesburg, Singapore, Riyadh, Cape Town, Sydney and others. So we have now got that confirmation, as I say, that Heathrow will reopen in a phased manner, clearly, from 5 p.m, so in the next couple of minutes, and that those flights will begin to take off from 7 p.m. This evening. We're also expecting to hear from the CEO of Heathrow Airport at 5:15 this afternoon. An unprecedented situation, the closure of the UK, of Europe's busiest airport. That is it from me on Business Live for the moment. Back, of course, at 11:30 on Monday. Jonathan Samuels is next. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.